Now, the new Defence Secretary, Wes Streeting, is looking to build his relationship with the United States by offering to lead a global effort to reopen the Strait of Hormuz. That is, after there is an end to the current war. It comes after the new minister told his US counterpart, Pete Hegseth, that the UK wants to build a 40-nation coalition to safeguard the vital shipping route, with plans for a major security summit in London. Let's talk to David Charter, Assistant US Editor of The Times. Hello, David.
Hello, Carole from Washington, D.C.
Tell us a bit more about this plan and how the US sees this.
Yeah, this seems to have come up in a phone conversation between Wes Streeting and Pete Hegseth on Friday. And it is all part of a charm offensive, I think, by the new Defence Secretary to try and show that this British administration wants to be close, as close as it can be to the US, and to work with them. Of course, it's been a pretty bumpy road with after the Keir Starmer government initially refused to let British bases be used by the Americans for bombing raids. So it's still the case that the government will allow British bases to be used only for defensive raids by the US Air Force. And it's still the case that it will only send help following a permanent ceasefire. So not a lot has actually changed, which the Americans will be keenly watching. But I think Wes Streeting is trying to change the mood by sounding more cooperative, although this meeting that has not yet been confirmed sounds to me rather similar to a plan, in fact, a meeting that was held back in April of 40 nations, although this was a virtual meeting, to discuss what they could do to help out in the Strait of Hormuz in the event of peace.
Isn't that the big big stumbling block to all of this in the event of peace breaking out? Because, I mean, as we've seen a brief pause once again for the last couple of days. But I mean, last week we saw, I think it was 13, 14 nights of strikes and counter-strikes coming to a brief halt. And that was provoked when the Iranians attacked shipping in the Strait of Hormuz. And aren't we still a very, very long way away from any kind of agreement which would be sufficient to satisfy the UK and indeed other nations that this was the moment to start putting their military facilities into the Strait of Hormuz?
Well, yes, I don't think we're a lot closer than we were on April the 2nd when there was the previous UK organised 40-nation summit about Hormuz. I think the indications that this is a change of mood came really if you just see what Wes Streeting had to say, because he said at the weekend it was important not to suck up to the Trump administration. And then, of course, he praised Trump for doing Europe and all the Nato members a big favour by making them focus on paying for their own defence, and having this warm call with Pete Hegseth, his opposite number. To me, as I say, it suggests an attempt to improve the mood music. But I don't see even seaborne drones, for example, unmanned, uncrewed vessels being sent unless there is a verifiable permanent ceasefire. And it seems to me that President Trump doesn't even really have much of a grasp on where this thing is going at the moment, because we were expecting there to be a few more days of this military action, and it was abruptly stopped. And we have the official reason, which was it's to allow time for talks, but we have briefing in Washington that, in fact, some military advisors were saying you've run out of targets unless you want to go for civilian targets. And some military advisors were saying we're running out of defensive weapons to defend US bases in the region and to defend US allies, so that we're getting dangerously low on Patriot missiles. So it is a bit of a mess at the moment, and I think
the present government is making it clear that it is going to continue with the policy of Keir Starmer's government, which is saying you can only use UK bases for defensive operations. Clearly, there would have been some in Republican circles who might have liked a bit more of a wholehearted backing for all of this. We've got Wes Streeting clearly trying to make his mark as the new Defence Secretary, not someone who's got much experience in this field. He seems to be trying to reach out to the Secretary of War, Pete Hegseth. But, I mean, how do you see that relationship panning out? Because clearly they come from very different backgrounds, very different political traditions.
Well, it's very hard to simply use warm words with this Trump administration. They want to see very concrete results and outcomes. And I think another problem that's looming is Andy Burnham's own decision on Chagos and the future of that island with the big American base, Diego Garcia, on it, because I don't think he seems to have a different view to the Starmer administration, which was to hand it over to Mauritius. And again, Trump has taken against that. Initially, this is a problem with the Trump administration, is that Trump wasn't focused on it before and seemed to suggest it was okay. When he focused on it, he didn't like the deal at all, and they don't like it. And again, that's something that's going to cause a problem if and when the government confirms Chagos is being handed over.
David Charter, Assistant US Editor of The Times. Really good to have you with us. Thanks so much.
Carole.
Yes, it's time for our weekly segment where we look at what's going on in America in the run-up to the midterm elections. Last week, President Trump announced a new wave of tariffs on more than 80 countries. They range from 10% to 12.5% and include some of the US's biggest trading partners, including Canada, Mexico and China. We can talk to Jean Marks, who is a small business owner and the founder of the Marks Group, a technology and financial management consulting firm. Hello, Jean.
Hello, Carole. How are you?
Very well. Delighted to have you with us tonight. Tell us, first of all, what you make of these latest tariffs. Some of them were basically the same as the old tariffs, but with a different justification. But there are some new ones as well. What sort of difference are they going to make to your business?
Sure. And just to give you some context, Carole, so, besides my own business, we have about 400 small and mid-sized businesses in the U.S. I mean, I write every week for The Guardian. I've been doing this for a number of years, and I cover small business issues and have addressed tariffs as a big issue that's affected a lot of businesses this year. But I can tell you this much, the latest wave of tariffs, to get to your question, has been received by many of the people I'm interviewing and many of the small business owners in my community kind of with a ho-hum. People were terrified at the uncertainty of tariffs a year ago, particularly when some of the large tariff numbers were being, bandied about, Carole. I mean, there was a 50% tariff applied on all goods coming in from India, for example, which really had a lot of small businesses up in arms. But now that the Supreme Court has overturned the president's attempt to use the Emergency Powers Act for tariffs, and the president is now back to really pinpointing tariffs on specific industries, countries that violated certain rules, which are all going to be contested in court. Yes, there's going to continue to be uncertainty about them, but the dollar impact is nowhere near as significant as a lot of businesses were facing over a year ago. So I think it's muted.
Yeah, I mean, just to be clear, we had that court ruling against the previous round of tariffs. He then announced this new round, which was based on countries that he said were not doing enough to tackle forced labour.
Right.
But I mean, it's quite hard to see how countries like, including the UK, are particularly falling foul of that. But is it affecting American businesses? Because presumably it means that there are big tariffs on quite a lot of the products that they need to import in order to make their goods.
There is no question that it has an effect. But you know what, Carol? I mean, high energy prices are having a big effect on a lot of businesses right now. Supply chain issues are affecting businesses. You talk to any business in this country, and you look at their costs that they are incurring to operate their businesses compared to just, a few years ago at the very end of COVID, many of them have been looking at 20 to 30% price increases, in addition to the threat of tariffs. So it's just one among many, among many factors. So what have businesses been doing? Some of them that are more harder hit by this or more exposed have been doing things like using bonded warehouses and have aggressively been pursuing refunds from the last tariff adventure that the president attempted. Others are just they're passing down price increases to their customers, and they're getting very smart about how they're doing it. Most customers are experiencing this and are accepting them. They've navigated their way around this. And I think this latest round of tariffs is just going to be just yet another thing that they're going to have to adjust for. But I don't think it's going to put anybody out of business,
President Trump talked about tariffs from the outset as this great idea to boost American business because it was going to be a huge incentive for companies to base their operations in the United States so that they wouldn't be hit by these tariffs. I mean, has that really worked? The US economy doesn't seem to be doing particularly brilliantly.
Well, actually, the U.S. economy has actually held its own over the past year and a half, and in fact, the unemployment itself has remained relatively steady. GDP has been growing between 2% and 3%. One interesting statistic to look at is the Institute of Supply Management is a very well looked at. I use it when I write on the economy for The Guardian, where they really track both manufacturing and service industries. And, Carol, for the past 2 years, manufacturing was in decline in the U.S. It was contracting. The ISM is reporting actual expansion of manufacturing in this country over the past 6 months in a row. So it's not necessarily just a blip. Anecdotally, Carol, I mean, I travel to my clients around the country. Many of them are in the manufacturing world, or they sell to the manufacturing world, like shippers or foundries. And again, it's anecdotal, but many of them tell me as well that they have had more interest and more deals with larger foreign companies who are trying to move more of their operations to the U.S. to not only avoid tariffs, but to also try and cut down on other costs like shipping for their U.S. customers. So okay. I'm starting to see that, but it may be too premature to tell.
Gene Marks, founder of the Marks Group. Really good to have your insight. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Carol. You take care.
Well, let's bring in Charles Franklin, who is director of the Marquette Law School poll. Hello, Charles.
Hello, good to be with you.
Well, tell us a bit more about how Americans generally are seeing this latest round of sweeping tariffs, which the president has announced, including on some of the US's closest trading partners.
Yes, tariffs on trading partners has become a common thing these days. What we saw was that a substantial majority of voters in the country, well over 65%, approved of the Supreme Court's decision to block Trump's earlier tariffs. Now we're having these new tariffs come back, and we haven't gotten much polling right away, but I expect they're going to be opposed by the substantial majority of folks in line with the opposition to the earlier tariffs.
Well, we were hearing from Gene Marks. He's the founder of the Marks Group. It's a technology and financial management company. But he was saying, he also represents other small and medium-sized businesses, that many of those companies that were hit by the tariffs because they're having to pay the tariffs on stuff that they need for their businesses, that they were just passing it on to their consumers, as you would expect, to their customers. Is that what is behind the public concern about this?
I think that's a big part of it. The number one concern in the U.S. since 2022 has been concern over inflation and the cost of living. People see these tariffs as adding to the cost of living, and they don't see any benefits coming from them.
And this presumably includes, I mean, if you're talking about a lot of business people, we are also talking about a lot of traditional rural MAGA voters, supporters like farmers and so on. And if they work in manufacturing industry, are we seeing them unhappy about more tariffs from President Trump?
Yes, and in our surveys, when we ask about do you think tariffs are helping or hurting farmers here in Wisconsin, the overwhelming majority of people, including substantial majorities of Republicans, say those tariffs are hurting farmers. Now, that doesn't mean that farmers as a group are deserting the Republican Party, but they're quite unhappy about the tariffs. And in big agricultural states like Iowa, which has an important U.S. Senate race coming up, there seems to be considerable opposition to tariffs based on the damage that's done to farmers in the state, as well as here in Wisconsin and throughout the Midwest.
You mentioned there that the big concern of voters is the cost of living, and we're already seeing those concerns, aren't we, reflected in the political battles ahead of the midterms. How is President Trump faring there? Because, of course, one of the biggest pressures on the cost of living is the rising energy costs as a result of the Strait of Hormuz, and we saw that recent upsurge in fighting there.
And there are huge changes in the perception of those costs. In January, a slight majority of people said that their costs for gasoline had gone down over the last 6 months. In the 7 months since then, gigantic majorities, 90%, say cost of gasoline has gone up. So again, you've got the most important problem facing the country, inflation and cost of living, and the war is producing escalation in those gasoline and grocery costs, and the tariffs are also seen as driving up costs. It's a very unpopular program, though some Republicans still support tariffs, but the policy has not spoken to the things that Americans are most concerned about.
Finally, and just briefly, if you can, Charles, I mean, the president's still got time to turn things round, hasn't he, before those polls, all-important polls in November?
Well, time is ticking away. In our most recent poll, we found Trump's approval at an all-time low in either the first or the second term. He's been declining slowly but steadily over the entire second term, so that he's now at or below 40% approval in almost all of the polls, the national polls. I think that the prospects of turning that around in the just over 100 or just under 100 days from now to Election Day is pretty slim. I doubt the economy turns around that quickly. As the way the war has been going, it doesn't look like that ends within that 100 days either.
Charles Franklin, Director of the Marquette Law School Poll. Great to talk to you. Thanks so much.